All right, let's give it. We're having some technical issues with Vanya, but we're doing our absolute best to get it resolved. So let's just give that another minute, and then if she isn't in by then, she could just join us whenever. We have, there's not another panel after this, so you have until 8:45 San Francisco time. By the way, I just opened up this Babche Wines Farmers Fizz.
Oh.
Yeah,
How's
it's really
going?
tasty. It's good. So yeah, tell me about it, Niki. Oh, hi, Vanya.
Okay. Thanks very much, Jeanette. We'll meet one day.
Yeah.
Okay. See ya.
Okay, so just while you're getting settled, Vanya, Niki,
Sorry
about the Farmer Fizz.
So you're having the 2020 Farmers Fizz.
Yes, I am. Yeah.
So it's a single site pet nat that's been disgorged. So I guess you would have technically called it a pet nat. So we called it Farmers Fizz. Hand-picked fruit, fermented in bottle. We left it on lees for about 6 or 7 months, and we just gorged it. And actually the 2020, it's not 100% Chardonnay. There's about 10% Pinot Noir in that as well. So just another little layer there, but all coming from one single vineyard site on the Bellarine Peninsula, Wadawaran country. We've been working on that vineyard for the last 7 years, and I think the 2021 vintage will release will be the final wines that come from that site. So we were managing organically for the last 4 years, so that's what you're having, grapes from that site, and it'll be missed, but we love the Farmers Fizz that we've been producing the last couple of years from there. And this year we did 100% Chardonnay. So a little bit different than what you're having, Pam, but still quite delicious.
Yeah. Well, it's really good. Jane, I might be hitting you up for some more of it.
Cool. We have a tiny amount this year. There's just tiny quantities. We wish we could make
one more bottle.
Yeah, we'll find one. We'll keep
one I can share with my partner. That's all I ask.
Yeah.
So anyway, so glad to have this panel. I know that because of the time difference, everyone's energy might be a little bit different. But I'm as excited as I was earlier this morning. And just want to say quickly, a reason why I should probably introduce myself. I'm just assuming everyone knows who I am. I'm Pamela Bush. I am the founder of Wine Fair and the Vanguard, and this is the 4th year that we're doing Wine Fair. The first year we're doing it virtually, and next year we hope that we can do it in person again and everyone could meet under the same roof. But the idea to do Australia was because, like, when I first got into the wine industry, which was 30 years ago, Australian wines were starting to come on pretty big, and I had started getting into wine when I was living in London in the late 80s. And there was always a lot of Australian and New Zealand wine there. But then I started to notice in the States in the 90s is when it started coming on. And then it just kind of seemed like it started to really take a nosedive in like the early 2000s and really up until a few years ago. And what I've seen over the last few years is that there's starting to become this renaissance. People are talking about Australian wine a little bit more. And I think a lot of it has to do with what's going on there with natural wine. But one thing I want to say, and I'm sure you will be discussing this a lot during the panel, is that while natural wine is not like a new thing to Australia, there was a few people who are doing it. If not to the letter of what we can call natural wine today, definitely for their time they were doing things that nobody ever thought about doing, like native ferments and farming without use of chemicals. So I'm stoked that you're all here. Thank you so much. And I just want to I'm going to introduce Jane and then hop off. Jane Lopes is the moderator of today's panel, and I'm absolutely thrilled that she has agreed to do this. While American Jane spent several years working on Australia, and now she's been back in the States for a while, and Jane and her husband, Jonathan Ross, who's also a wine professional, started Legends Australia, and they're importing wine from Australia. So before that, I know, Jane, you've done a lot in the wine industry, and you're also a writer, so you have accomplished quite a lot. but it's been, and you've also been working on the wine industry equity pledge. We have a coalition of about 15 people, and you've been a huge help to that too. So I know you're really committed to a lot of what everyone is going to discuss today, and really committed to what's happening in Australia right now. So thank you for doing this, and I'm gonna pop off and continue to drink my farmer fizz. So without everybody watching me.
Nice one.
Thank you, Pamela. So before we go any further, I just wanted to introduce the idea of welcome to country and acknowledgement of country, which are really important rituals in Australia, and they're performed at really any public event. So a welcome to country is one of the oldest traditions and greatest examples of hospitality, performed by a traditional custodian or elder from a particular region. It can be done through speech, dance, song, or ceremony. If a First Nations elder is not present at an event to do a welcome to country, an acknowledgement of country can be made by anyone. So I'd like to perform a very short acknowledgement of country before we begin, and we'll hear more later from our individual panelists about the relationship to their land. So I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and recognize their continuing connection to land, waters, and culture. Their stewardship, present for over 65,000 years, has shown us the community and care required to continue to look after the land, as many in this room do. We pay our respects to elders past, present, and emerging. Thank you. And thank you all for being here. It's really a great pleasure for me to be a part of this panel and a part of Wine Fair. Pamela mentioned the Justice and Equity Pledge, which I encourage everyone to check out as well. I'm going to pop the link in the chat for the 2020 version, and the 2021 version will be dropping soon. I want to say a big thank you to our sponsor for this panel, and that's Molly's Bottle Shop. Molly's is a natural wine shop with 2 locations in Seattle, as well as an online shop started by Molly Ring. So Molly's has really shown a commitment to community in the wine industry through education, wine clubs, book groups, supporting events like this, and also is a signee, I don't know, I'll have to work out that one, of the Justice and Equity Pledge. Okay, so we're here to talk about the Australian wine renaissance. As Pamela mentioned, I am somewhat qualified to lead this conversation. I spent 3 years as a wine director in Australia, and I now import Australian wine. I'm writing a book on Australian wine. I just have a great appreciation for the people, the lands, and the wines of Australia. So I'm thankful to be here, and I also feel very fortunate to be here in the fact that I don't come from a traditional sort of natural wine background, and more from a conventional wine background. So I'm grateful to be part of this community, and for the natural wine community for initiating and following through on kind of the really important conversations that we're having this weekend. So just a few points of business before we get into it. Panelists, if you're not speaking, it's a good practice to keep yourself on mute, although all of you seem to have very nice, quiet environments, so I'm not too worried about that. Audience members, if you're experiencing any feedback or anything, you can always mute someone if you need to. Hopefully you won't need to, but you can mute people for your individual screen with those by clicking the 3 buttons on their picture, on their video. Please use the chat function throughout to converse with each other, and I will try to monitor that. But if you have a specific question you'd like us to address in the Q&A, pop that in the Q&A portion. Okay, so I think that's all the business. Let's get into it. I'm gonna start by just going around and having everyone introduce themselves. Just tell us your name, where your winery is, and a bit about what you do. So Sophie, you're in my upper right. Let's start with you.
Hi everyone, I'm Sophie Button from Commune Buttons in the Adelaide Hills, which is in South Australia. Basket Range is probably quite synonymous with natural wine in Australia at the moment. And we've kind of been on that bandwagon as it would, but also kind of helping it move along. And I would acknowledge the paramount people of our Adelaide Hills and all the way down to Kangaroo Island. I don't know, I always wonder how well people know the geography of Australia, but probably not enormously well when it comes to the South Australian. We're not on the East Coast, we're in central South Australia. Did I forget something? No.
I'm just trying to unmute myself.
Yeah.
Thank you, Sophie. Maybe I'll go to Alicia next, since you are in the same region. You can kind of just stay geographic.
Oh, Alicia, you're not mute. You're still muted, Babs.
Hi. Hi, I'm Alicia Basa. I am one half of Borachio wine, and I am Sophie's neighbour. And I live in Kerry Gully. And I would, like to acknowledge the traditional owners, the Paramount people. I don't know. I've been doing this 5 years. I was originally in Sydney, and then my husband and I moved down to the hills for a tree change, as it were, and I don't plan on going back. So I love it here.
Thank you. Let's go over to Western Australia with Vanya Cullen.
Oh, hi, everybody. Yeah, I guess, the first thing is to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land where the wines are made, the Wurundjeri people. They're the saltwater people. My family have been here for a long while. It's our 50th anniversary this year at Cullen's. We're a certified biodynamic, carbon positive, naturally powered estate that has a philosophy of quality, integrity and sustainability. And my mum used to always say quality, not quantity, and we've certainly put the sustainability tag on there, from a land through to incorporating everything and all the connections that takes place. But it's basically about connecting to nature to make great wine.
Thank you, Vanya. Niki, you're up.
Hey there, everyone. So I'm Niki. I live and work on Wadawaran country, known as the Bellarine Peninsula in Victoria. Acknowledge the original custodians of this land and the abuse they suffered following colonization, and I honor them past, present, and emerging. So I'm one half of Babche Wines. That's a collaboration between my husband, Tim, and I. We're releasing our third vintage later this year, but we've been making wine for longer than that. Tim is a trained winemaker for over 10 years now. I've been in industry for about 7 years, and in Australia for almost 6 years now. We're inspired by 2 generations of our families who grew grapes and made wine, hence the name of our label, Babche, meaning grandmother in Macedonian, which is my heritage, and an ode to my grandmother, so my Babche, the matriarch in our family who made wine and grew grapes before her home was ravaged by war in Europe. So she's been a major source of inspiration and guidance for us. We currently source our grapes, but since we started our label, our goal has always been to grow our own and to be involved in the process start to finish. So we recently were very fortunate to purchase a small certified organic block in Timboon on Gurudjarama country. That's 15 minutes inland from the Great Southern Ocean in Victoria. The site is a beautiful, well-drained site of clay and limestone with lots of precipitation over winter. Gives us opportunity to harvest this water and use it during the dry growing season. So we're super excited to finally have our vines planted there later this year that we've been propagating for over 3 years now, and continue making wine, and that'll be our home for Babches. And this site will also transform into a permaculture farm woven into the vineyard. So this is something that's going to obviously take some time. So we're really excited to see how everything evolves in the next 5 to 10 years on this site in Timboon. That's an undiscovered vineyard site. There's maybe 3 vineyards planted in the surrounds. So it'll be interesting to see how things evolve.
Awesome. Thank you. And thank you all for being here. I know it's getting this organized with the time differences has been difficult, and you all have just, of course, come out of harvest season as well, which is, we know, very demanding. So thank you for being here. I guess I wanted to kick off by kind of just really talking about our, this broad definition of natural wine. And I know that this sort of movement and the wines has taken on a life of its own. So I guess I'm just interested to hear kind of how you all relate to the term natural to describe your wines, if it's a term you use, and if you think there's kind of, I guess, anything problematic now with sort of the that term and what it's come to mean. Does anyone want to kick us off?
Sure. I'll kick off. I think semantics plays a huge part in wine because of its because there's not very many spaces that you can kind of be questioned or on your own smell or taste, and in wine you can be, and it's something that you kind of, it's very rarely kind of questioned, like how you smell that or how you taste that or where that's from in such an intense way. And so I think that creates this kind of a weight of semantics around wine, and natural is a beautiful word for it. I think it really covers it in a really nice way, but because we're humans and we have so many questions and want to define things all of the time, that becomes problematic. And of course, where kind of larger companies or people with a different intention that is more to do with sales than is to do with farming, using the term natural becomes more complicated again, because you're using it like humans do. Wine is the same as most products in the world, in the sense of it's something that gets made and sold at the end of the day. How it's made and how it's sold is where the kind of trouble comes in. But I do think that natural wine is a really beautiful way to describe what it is, and in some ways, if anything, it's an invitation into asking more about what natural wine is. And that's when you open the can of wine is. I really appreciate the natural fermentation. To me, when I think of natural wine, I think of natural fermentation, and the part that the yeast play, because for me, that's the kind of fundamental part. It's how your wine will taste. Natural wines will taste different with the same varietal made the same way, because the soils are different, and because the yeast, the indigenous yeast to that area is different. And that to me is the most interesting and fundamental part of natural wine.
Yeah, I love that. Speaking of sort of the sales and marketing side of it, do you all see that as a problem in Australia, that people are sort of looking to buy into the aesthetics and use the aesthetics of natural wine to sell wine, and aren't sort of really buying into the other, the more, the farming, the natural use, the winemaking aspects of it? Is that a problem in Australia that you're seeing?
Yeah, I think it's interesting because having come from, we started wild yeast fermentation in 1991. And, you know, it's great. I love the topic, the Renaissance of Australian wine. It's sort of like, you know, if you look at, you know, the Indigenous people were making wine, you know, from gum and things in the early days. And then, you know, we come in with our inoculated yeast and how we make wine. So people were not accepting when we said we had Indigenous yeast that they actually were. And that was the first fight. And now everyone has wild yeast fermentation, and that can mean anything from 100% to very little, just with a little bit of terroir yeast. But I think in terms of your definition of natural wine, it has to be no chemicals in the vineyard, because it has to be about nature. And so conventionally farm, you know, from my view, there's no confusion about the definition. It has to be that, you know, the land is respected with no chemicals used and honoured in that way. And so the character of the land is also expressed as part of the terroir through the wild yeast. And those yeasts, you know, we had them tested in 2008 on our vineyard, and we had something like 600 different species of Saccharomyces in the vineyard and 400 in the winery, and about 80 species fermenting the wine. So it's a wonderful thing of, you know, biodiversity and uniqueness of place. But in terms of people greenwashing both chemicals, using the word organic and biodynamic, there's no legislation in Australia for those words yet. And I think it's a really important topic, you know, as to natural, what does that mean? It's as bad as what is organic and biodynamic. But that is changing, and I think that, you know, the topic of Australian wine renaissance, but there has to be some sort of legislation to make that something which is authentic, because what people want these days, in my opinion, is authentic. But it is fun. You're right. It's great fun to acknowledge the land through that component of wild yeast. But wild yeast is a very part of the beauty of nature that it's expressed in natural wine.
Yeah, I think the majority of customers currently in Australia identify natural wine in terms of low intervention winemaking as a style. I would like, and I've always hoped that sustainable farming or organic practices were implicit, but I know that they're not always the case. And you know, at the moment, we source our fruit from organic vineyards, not all certified organic, but I can also understand and respect producers who make natural wine. So in the cellar, they, you know, have natural ferments, they do not add anything, and they're quite hands off. But it's this, I can acknowledge there's a huge challenge in trying to find organically grown grapes or organically certified vineyards. So I think that's one challenge that we're facing. And in terms of kind of defining natural wine, beyond the aesthetics and the style, kind of encompassing viticulture and the broader environmental and economic sustainability, I think is something that obviously applies to all wines, and I think they should all be defined in this way. And at the moment, you know, you never will find a producer, whether they're organic or not organic or natural or not or natural, disclosing or having a chat about sustainable or non-sustainable farming practices, or you know, bragging that they've just sprayed Roundup. You know, that's something that we never, to me, implies that there's an ethical awareness. I think it's only a matter of time that the pendulum swings, and all of us, all wine is described in these tiers of not only winemaking style, not only viticulture, but environmental and economic sustainability beyond that. But I think at the moment in Australia, I think natural wine is focused around aesthetic, style, style, and viticulture as well. But I don't think generally we make huge statements on what we're doing beyond that. And I'm just saying that as the majority. I'm sure there's people that also are like a lot of you folks here.
Yeah, I think that's those are all really good points. I think you know, there's been such a broadening of the conversation. Really, it seems like in sort of my circles in the US in the past year and a half, where we've started talking In the US, a lot more about labor practices, a lot more about, connection to indigenous communities. And actually, labor is something I do want to touch on, because I think that it's taken a bit for granted in Australia that people will be paid fairly for their labor. But can someone just, for your kind of American listener who might be, accustomed to the expectation that, an undocumented agricultural worker could be getting paid $5 an hour for their work. Does someone, maybe Alicia, do you want to talk about sort of the standard fair labor in Australia?
Well, I can say from the wine industry in Australia, the minimum hourly rate is $25 to pay anyone, which is really good. So if we employ anyone, that's the minimum. And this is for a casual worker as well. So that's the minimum for anyone that we have to pay per hour if we employ them. Yeah.
One of the things during vintage this year, when we had because of COVID, we do all hand harvesting. I was listening to a chatback program of some guy that had travelled around Australia, and they said that one of the things was the wine industry in Margaret River really looked after everybody. We were having to pay $37 an hour for pickers, and also $77 an hour on weekends, on Sunday, and it's not sustainable. I do think Australian people, there was a bit of publicity about exploitation, but I think certainly in the wine industry everything's very well regulated, and we're so heavily taxed here that I think we need to look at employers and looking after them to make sure they can stay in business, because that having a $77 per hour on a Sunday, geez, we all want to be pickers, right? I don't know whether you guys had that thing, but it's like, wow, the pickers were in control and had everybody right over the barrel because there wasn't anybody. So, and it wasn't addressed by the government in terms of bringing people in because they couldn't. And so, looking at sustainability, I think, how can we, that there is also that aspect of, people look at us, oh, you've been around for a while, it must be easy. We have to work very hard all the time to stay in the market, keep our brand going, and also wave that big flag of, you running a sustainable business. So it's not just about the workers being, exploited. It's also about, the businesses being able to keep going, given the tax level that we are taxed in Australia in the wine industry. It's something like, I don't know, sort of 48 cents per bottle or something incredible. Yeah. So it gives an advantage to export. But I think that the wonderful natural wine movement and the organic it is evolving in Australia, and it's way over time because there's not a huge sustainability culture in Australia, but that is changing, and it's great seeing young faces and people who are moving towards that. And it is hard, and you really have to fight, because there's when we started biodynamics in 2004, it was just horrible. People just treated us really badly, but it's wonderful to have lived that, being older, through that change and that shift of consciousness in Australia, because it really is the country's greatest strength is that, the beautiful land and a pollution-free environment. So, I think there's so many things in there that need to be acknowledged, and it's a connection to everything, and to have sustainability as a big picture for everyone, because it's tough being out there having to, you guys know, make and sell your own wine and all of that. It's like a lot of things there that need to be addressed, and and we all just want to drink wine and have a good time, right?
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. I definitely don't think that us at Commune Buttons. So to give a bit of an idea, we've got 20 vines, 20 acres of under vine, and I think as farming, you would know that if you're switching from using conventional farming styles and chemicals, what you do is exchange that for hands, human hands. Sorry, all of you as farmers. I just meant I was going from what you're saying, Vanya. that you kind of really end up with an enormous expense when it comes to the labor that goes into the vineyards and the kind of care. It's kind of each vine needs this certain amount, and the amount of hours spent in the vineyard to swing that back around and kind of be creating this really beautiful biodynamic environment in the vineyard. So there are two things. There is we will always pay people award wages. That way you don't have to think about it, right? You don't have to be kind of confused by the situation. However, there is this other side where it's almost an educational program where we've got people coming from overseas who want to work during vintage, and we would do board and still pay, have an arrangement, and food and wine, of course, wine. There is this space that makes it like that you cannot ignore that we're an organic farm. We're not certified, and happy not to be in the sense of, but there's other things that are higher priority. And we're surrounded by cherry orchards and apple orchards, and they've been farming here for over 100 years, pretty much cherries, strawberries and apples, and they farm conventionally, and there are sprays that go on around. You can't even see any of those from here. We don't get spray drift or anything, but they have a system that works, and that kind of like idea of everyone should be doing, it's more sustainable and everyone should be doing organic farming, I think is a really dangerous conversation to be having. I think you have to be a little bit like considerate.
Oh, there goes the.
I'm back.
You're back, I think. All right, we're losing Sophie a bit. This is, we were saying before we started, this is the perils of being out in these beautiful winemaking regions.
Should have come to my house, Soph.
My back. I don't know where I lost you.
I think so. I think I got most of it. I think you were saying that you just have to be sensitive to sort of the economic perils, the cost of converting to organics, and how that is not feasible for a lot of businesses.
Yeah, there needs to be support in a greater kind of spans. And I think the reason why the Australian wine market dipped so hideously is because we became these massive wineries that need all sorts of, that they need, when you're a blend, you really need to be doing all sorts of things to it to make sure that it doesn't go off or spoil and that it tastes exactly the same. And what that did was completely destroy the Australian wine markets back in the 90s, and the farms became too huge and all of that stuff. And the water consumption to run a vineyard that is like 3,000 hectares is enormous in the desert, and all of the things like those major things aren't being discussed ever about what farming actually needs to be. And I'm not saying we're doing it perfectly, but I just think that you can't just be like, you can't kind of be in some ways in this middle class of let's everyone just be organic and sustainable. Why doesn't everyone do it? Because I don't think it's that easy.
Yeah, I'll go off of that point. But for example, like we're a tiny operation and we're about to start our own vineyard, and I continuously I'm online looking at any opportunity for grants from the government to help support a small agricultural endeavor, and there's zero unless we're making $1 million profit, which is massive for us. So I'm not the only one. There's so many people in my boat, or working in a bit of a larger scale, which is still small scale according to the government. So it's very difficult to obtain this obtain this support. And we've all kind of established that organic or biodynamic farming does require more hands on the ground. It requires much more resources. It's expensive to bring wine to bottle. with the amount of effort required in the vineyard. So we are somewhat fortunate, I suppose, because we're a tiny operation. So myself and Tim undertake all the work in the vineyard, so we don't need to immediately pay ourselves until our wine is sold. However, if we were a larger operation and we had to hire staff and absolutely pay them the word rate, which is regulated in Australia, and it's a huge benefit. I think it's positive because I've come from other places where people are completely underpaid or this whole industry is taken advantage of. But if we were a larger scale operation, we would have to ensure that the final cost of the wine covers the cost that organic vineyard management demands. So yeah, I agree with what Sophie and Vanya have said.
I also think, as I am the only one here that doesn't have my own piece of land yet, but it is something we're working towards, like just the cost of land in Australia in general. It's not cheap. Mark and I started with nothing, and everything that we earn goes back into the business. And even then, like, you know, it does cost, like, and, you know, we were hoping that we would be able to get some land, and then COVID hit and everyone decided they wanted to move into our area. So then it's pushed up the price of things more. So yeah, it's not something that you can just decide one day and then start implementing it, unless you win the lotto. Like, I don't know. It's not an overnight thing.
Yeah, well, what is it? If you have a large fortune, if you want a small fortune, start with a large one and enter the wine industry. I mean, we've planted in 1971, and when the year my father died in 1994, we broke even, and he was very, very pleased about that it had finally happened. So it is a long-term, it is sort of an accepted part of the wine industry, which is really strange. It's like giving away free samples. They don't do that necessarily in the food industry, or people's times for free. But certainly, I think, you know, the thing that you say, it's okay for people not to be organic because it's too hard, I think it's just not acceptable, because from my point of view, we can't keep putting chemicals on the land. We've got climate change existential crisis that we're living in, and in Australia we're really incredibly fortunate with respect to how we live. And so, you know, that whole thing of regenerative agriculture, which I know is addressed in other sessions, but having land which can be, instead of, you know, the minute you put synthetic chemicals on land, you stop 50% of carbon sequestration, and that's happening globally. So that stops. Australia's got the opportunity, if carbon farming became something which was, you know, we could make money from. We've got $100,000 worth of carbon credits sitting in our vineyard because we're carbon positive that we can't realise. And it's like if everyone looked at the world like that, it wouldn't be necessarily that you have to give something back if you're in business to the earth, because we can't keep taking like we're taking. And the other thing is, you make better quality wine. In my 39-year experience, is that seeing from minimal chemical to organic to biodynamic. And it's not easy, but it's not easy being in the wine industry. Nothing's really easy, but it's a wonderful thing to be involved in. So I think that sort of, it's too hard. We have to, you know, to be certified. We need to be certified so that we can have legislation with respect to the words organic and biodynamic, so that we can actually turn the whole world around in terms of, you know, stopping the logging of native forests and, you know, having a regenerative agriculture. And the wine industry has a huge part that it could play in that. So I think the word natural is a very important word. It's like sustainability and organic and biodynamic. And having seen the amount of greenwashing that happens in this region and in Australia, I think it really is one of the most critical things for the world and for all future generations. You know, if it's not for us, we're living a nice life in the moment, but relatively speaking. But I think it's, you know, it just can't be, you know, oh, it's too hard. That's what people just say to us. It's too hard. Oh, you can do it. And it's like, it hasn't been easy, but we just believe and say we can, and we keep going. And it's like, you do. And you make, you know, it's like, it's this, you know, that you give to the land gives back. And I love the whole sense of, you know, be careful where you tread, because you're walking on a queendom or kingdom underneath you. It's alive. And so, yeah, that's my point about it. It's just like, it's not, it is hard, but you just have to keep going. And, you know, we've been going since 1971, you know.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I know, but I don't. I think I'm a little bit more of a realist when it comes to it. Is all I think I'm talking about, because amongst my peers and amongst the other organic farmers that I'm around all the time, and natural winemakers, the conversation becomes about dogmatic terminology and like, are you doing this? Well, if you're putting sulfur in your wine, well, you're not natural. And if you're doing this, well, you're not that. And if you do that and you're not that, you've got to be hardcore, even though the wine starts to really take a battering in some cases and yada, yada, yada. But you've got to, I think I'm being, for me, a little bit more of a realist when it comes to people who have been farming the way that they have been farming, needing to be shown the light and needing to be shown the light through the government. I'm not saying don't do it because it's hard. I'm saying that it's really hard to be farmer to farmer, and they should be farming the way I farm, as far as they're concerned. The education and the help from and the kind of assistance from the government is not there to be suggesting that, one, yeah, your product will be better. Two, the people consuming those products. So, I mean, we're talking about natural wine, but I was mentioning the farmers around here who farm along creek lines, apples and cherries, but it goes all the way along to the consumer who doesn't want to on apples, even though they're the most tastiest apples around, the organic ones from up here. It's like the supermarkets don't want them because the people don't want them. Like there's this chain reaction that happens where we become all responsible. But in Australia, we do have a very kind of listen to our government in a much more intent way in some ways, especially farmers, because it's always on the news, the farmers doing it tough, the droughts, the this, the that, as a kind of the kind of country that we are. But I truly think my point is just that it's hard, but it needs to come from education and the government to change organic farming and to get sustainability as a much more important topic of farming, or the kind of beginning of your farming practices.
I would I'd just like to jump in on Sophie, and I agree with her. And, from someone who looking in or looking to get started in, becoming organic and sustainable and biodynamic, like it is really quite intimidating. And, especially with all the terminology out there and, trying to get information, like people can get confused because language and context is like really important. And especially when you have different points of view, because, everyone is doing their version of it and it might not be the same as someone else's. So I think it's really important that the education is inclusive and accessible, so someone coming from the outside can educate themselves and start in a way that is going to be considered and conscious, and it's going to help. But yeah, it is hard, but it's going to take a long time.
I don't think so. I think it needs to happen now. And I know it's hard. I know I've been through all of that. I've been through being, kicked off mainstream Australian wine industry because we went biodynamic, and being put into the environmental section on all counts. And so I've seen that. And, you just basically, everybody wants to shaft you because you're not doing what they want. So that from my point of view, it's so important for the earth. If you don't do it, we're not going to have a planet for, your children to live on. Climate change is so important. And, our government, I wouldn't hang around waiting for organic grants. I mean, you look at what happened with rootstock. I mean, Mike Benny and his crew, put on this incredible event for, I think it was 5 years, where they started off getting 500 people and then ended up having 30,000 people through, but they had to do it with volunteers because they couldn't get any money. But I think that is changing, and hopefully, with the pressure, business sort of pressure from globally, where people won't be able to sell their wine if they have glyphosates in their wine, that will change it. So it'll come from outside Australia, that pressure to change. But I know what you're saying, and I've been through it, and we're still in it. So it's really great to see everyone going organic. but it's you know, it's a bigger global story than just wine, you know.
Yeah.
And I you know, I am giving a lecture a bit, and sorry about that, but I just feel it's so important that people are authentic and are, you know, believe in it and talk to how wonderful nature is and how we can do it, because you can. And because it, you know, we used to farm without chemicals before. I mean, to think that the chemicals that are put on the land are, you know, nerve gases that they used to kill people with. It's like, would you want that on your land? Would you want to feed people with that? Well, no, the answer. So it's that bad, and it just gets dumbed over. You know, we're eating food that's not that sort of dumbed over food, and it's a big picture of, you know, human health and how we live in the world. And natural wine is a part of that renaissance, if you like, for everybody globally, and it's a global story, not just Australia. So I take my hat off to the organisers of this event.
Yeah, I don't think people are waiting around for organic grants. I think everyone here can relate to the realities of trying to be organic, and I think everyone's striving to do that in their own way. Like, as you all know, winemaking, people don't go in it to make money, especially if they're doing, you know, the styles that we're doing, or, you know, it's a labor out of love. And I think everyone's doing what they can. What we're really discussing about is some realities that we do have to face. It is important to educate, you know, the sector and beyond. It's important to have more incentives, just as it's important as the incentives are there for people that are farming commercially. There needs to be incentives for people that are farming organically to make this more viable. It's great to have that passion and to have that drive. That definitely will get you to where you need to be, no matter how long it takes. But I think it's important to consider the context and different realities of people. You know, not being able to obtain a block of land, that's where it starts. That's where we can have the full power and independence to do it your way. These are all realities that people face. So I think sometimes to say you have to do this immediately now, it's just not viable for everyone. But I do think the intention is there, and the drive and the passion is there, and obviously people are doing it any way they possibly can. And I agree with you. It is important to pay attention to what the winemaking and wine growing practices are harming the environment, and how, you know, there's opportunity for us to improve the way we're doing things. But we just have to be compassionate and understanding of the context and the challenges that people are facing independently.
Would you know about quantum physics? If you say that you're something, you're already there. That's what I'm talking about. It's like, it's not saying I'm not having empathy for people who can't, because I understand and I feel all of that. I've been through it. But it's like, if you say that you can't, you won't. But if you say that you're already there, then you're there. It's like, you know, all that's just how it is. It's. I totally feel for you guys. I know exactly what it is that it is. It's horrible. I mean, you know. Sure, we have land, but there's always different challenges that come up, and it's like, you know, there's always something that's happening. It's never nothing, you know. There's always something. It's now we got COVID, and so yeah, it's the more people that feel that way, the better. I think that's a greater consciousness, isn't it? Really.
Yeah.
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 Okay, cool. I want to ask a couple questions that I think the answer may be that we don't even need to ask these questions. So you tell me. The first is, you know, should we still be having a conversation about sulfur? I know I think it's kind of split down the middle with this group. I think two of you, I want to say Niki and Alicia, do not use any sulfur. And Sophie and Vanya use sort of a small amount of sulfur. At this point in the natural wine conversation in Australia, is it sort of to each their own? I mean, Sophie, you mentioned that there's definitely some people who take the more dogmatic view that if you're using sulfur, you're not a natural wine. You know, I feel in my circles that this is kind of relaxing a bit, but what's sort of the vibe? What's the vibe in Australia on sulfur?
Oh, I think it's kind of like you could have any word that's sulfur and it be the kind of problem. We have a pursuit of making sans sulfur wine, like no addition. That's definitely a Pinot Noir in the Adelaide Hills, and so it's a challenge. And it's something that we've learnt to become comfortable with. I think for me, you know, when I'm at wine shows or conversation with people who are, you know, learning about wine, they're open to knowing more and they want to know more, and that their first question has to do with sulfur. To me, that is because, and I could get not offensive, but it could be offensive for some people. But I think that that's a sales pitch. I think that with the type of intent that customers come to me at festivals that have this real disdain for sulfur, and I'm like, do you eat dried apricots? Do you eat cured meats? Do you eat, like, sulfur is used in so many things. I'm not saying that we always want to use sulfur, because it is a preservative, and when you're talking about the best wines I've had ever in the world have not had sulfur additions, as far as I'm concerned. That's my opinion. But when you see these people coming to you who have this little wine knowledge, or a kind of consumer level wine knowledge, and they're kind of coming at you about how much sulfur you add and what it means and all these things, it's like, where do you even get this information from, man? And I think it actually comes from a bit of an ignorant kind of, at the end of the chain of making wine, in the sales side of things, like in restaurants, at bottle shops, like the conversation that is had with the person selling and the person buying, that conversation has gotten out of control and people don't actually know what they're saying. I think it's out of control. For the most part, if you actually end up talking to people, it doesn't seem to make any sense from the consumer point of view. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, sorry, you go.
Oh, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, from a biodynamic point of view, Rudolf Steiner considered that sulfur was, you know, wonderful because it was a connector from the earth to sky. So it's not an unnatural thing to start. Also, that, you know, yeasts make up to, when they're fermenting, 40% sulfur dioxide anyway. So you're never going to have a wine that's, you know, is sulfur free, because it makes it naturally. So we now put PF on our bottles because we're not allowed to put preservative free, because there's preservative in there. So when people ask me that question, that's what I say. I was like, you know, well, what's the difference? It's just like, you know, there is sulfur there anyway, or sulfur dioxide. So yeah, that's my comment about that. And you have to spray with sulfur because it's a natural compound. It's not a unnatural chemical.
Yeah, I think it's I think just the label, you know, sulfur free, or how you perceive that, again, it's another subjective topic that can go in so many different directions. But our goal from Babche is, when we say we're not adding anything to the wines, it's a personal goal. I've had wines that haven't had any sulfur, and I have wines that I've had very good wines that had no added sulfur, and very bad wines. So it just, I like, how can we make this, how far can we take this? And there's, again, we have to take into consideration the context. Not making a sulfur-free wine kind of decreases the type of style of wine you can make. So we pick early, we have high acid, we keep pH low, we do so many things that we cannot mimic a wine that would have, say, more sulfur added to it. And again, the spectrum of additions varies. You can have a wine that's heavily sulfured, and yes, it will knock you the fuck out the next day, you know. And you can have a wine that's thoughtfully sulfured, and, you know, with a minimal amount to keep things sound and clean, and that's fine. You know, I don't have any anger against people who use sulfur or don't, you know. There's just a huge spectrum, and there's context. If we've had a year where grapes did very poorly, and there's, you know, lots of disease, maybe we would consider to add sulfur. Maybe it'll be a smart thing to add a small amount just to make a sound wine. But we're very fortunate where we're getting our grapes from at the moment. They're super clean. They do very well in the region. We focus on Pinot Noir and Chardonnay. We do, you know, the Farmer's Fizz. We pick it super early. Things chemically are, you know, they give us a green light for us to not add any sulfur. But yeah, I think it just varies. And for us, like I said, it's a personal goal. And we just want to see where we can take that.
I agree. Yeah, it is. I mean, I think it's. I'm similar with Sophie. I think people need to be educated about what they are asking, but in the same sense, like I'm not offended by people adding sulfur, because for some people, if it's a difference between having a wine that they can sell that's drinkable to pay bills and not, then I think adding the correct amount of sulfur is correct, well, is right. It's like everyone's circumstances are different, and you can't have a blanket stance on it. You have to look at the context.
That's great. Yeah, I think that I think the more that we can move these conversations into ones of nuance and specific circumstances rather than sort of dogma, I think the better off we are. So my second question that may not be very useful, but this is a question I would get asked a lot in interviews, like, what's it like to be a woman in the wine industry? And you're kind of like, well, this is the only way I know. So, but I guess what has been your experience as women winemakers in Australia? Do you think there's extra hurdles or extra burdens, or do you think it's a pretty level playing field?
Ha 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 ha. Oh man, what is it? 99% men and then 1% woman, in the sense of when you stand. I remember going to a lunch one time and I was the only woman in the room, and there was probably 30 men there. And I'm not a winemaker in the sense of I'm a wine producer, so I would call myself a wine producer. My brother makes the wine. I make the wine with him, in the realm of, like, if only I know exactly what it is to make wine, but to put him, is winemaking is huge. So I find the industry to be old school, and I think old school is a little bit kind of I don't want to be like some kind of like aggressive. I don't want to come off as that gal, but there's been heaps of times when you're kind of frustrated by what is assumed. I can stand at a table when Jap and I did rootstock for the first time in the I don't know, 5 years ago, whenever it was. But every single person just thought I was his wife. I am his sister, of course, but every person thought I was his wife and that he was the winemaker, and wasn't I doing a good job helping my husband out or my big brother out? And so it's just an assumption, and it's not necessarily made by the wine or the wine world. It's also consumers, that when you do a job that has notorious or like has been men, then it's uncomfortable, I suppose, when it's a woman. And that's probably most industries that are dominated by men, I would have said. Wine's not outside of the world. That's what I would say.
Yeah, well, from my point of view, I mean, I had my mother, and also my grandmother, Grace Madeline, was a suffragette, and so she was a nature photographer and believed in the voting rights of women, Emily Pankhurst, and also that women had an equal status when they, come out in society. And so Mum was very, and Dad too. Dad believed that all the women should have an education, and so it was very, very lucky to be in that sort of environment of women need independence and they're equal. My father's hero was Jesus Christ, because he was the first person to acknowledge that we know of having women being equal to men. So, I think having from that, being the first female show judge in Australia and first female panel chair and judge of Australian wine shows, it certainly what has been and was male dominated. And very tough in terms of it being a male system. And so, but I think that's changed a lot now. There's a lot of women that are judging wine shows, and it's changing, but still I think there's a lot to be said for, you know, we live in a market-driven economy, which is about, you know, making money and numbers. And I think that women, and I look at the earth as being, you know, a mother and a woman too, and that, you know, we need to look at more compassionate ways of living, full stop. And I think that'd be good for men as well. So it's a big question, but there's certainly, you know, that you know, that glass ceiling thing, that, you know, that undermining, that, you know, blokes going out having and I think certainly in America, when I worked in Robert Mondavi in 1985, it was really nice to have you know, there were women working, you know, at Mondavi. There was, you know, senior winemakers, and it was an equal gender workplace, which was a real revelation in terms of, you know, people talking to you and, you know, all that sort of thing. And it's just, I used to surf too, and I remember going out surfing, and, you know, no one would talk to you. They'd just go, "Oh, look, there's a chick," you know, and you know, I remember the first time that someone actually asked me as I was paddling, "And what's the surf like?" And I was like so shocked. This young man actually spoke to me. So yeah, I think it is changing, but yeah, it sort of still is as you say, Sophie, it is male dominated, definitely. And you go into those rooms that, you know, are all full of men, and you just get used to it in a way. But that's changing, and it's I think it's because, you know, there's not a lot of women that want to be in that situation, perhaps. But I think it's great having forums like this, which have all women, because most of the forums I've been in my history of working in the wine industry have been, you know, all men. That's not a bad thing if they're good people. So it's not necessarily, and I think, you know, I often get asked, do women have better palates? And I think you're either a wine person or you're not. And certainly women, you know, are brought up in the kitchen. But, you know, when people come to work at our winery, as you do, you train them or whatever, that, you know, some people have that ability, and some people don't. And certainly I think women, you know, are more interested in taste sometimes. And it always interests me that, you know, most of the great chefs in the world are men, and when women are the ones that are in the kitchen. So yeah, there's lots of interesting topics there.
Yeah, I haven't. Oh, sorry, go, Alicia.
You go.
I agree with Vanya. I mean, it is a male-dominated sector, but it's not always a bad thing. I have not consciously considered the question of being a woman in winemaking, because I haven't had any negative pushback from any men in the region. Like, I feel actually quite encouraged, but my path didn't start that way. I remember when I first, you know, poignant memory that keeps coming back to me when we start these discussions. I always forget it, but when I first shared my goal to want to do this and go back into winemaking and viticulture, was something that my grandparents did. When my dad heard that, he said, "What are you going to do going into winemaking, viticulture amongst so many men? That's not a place for women." I remember that statement, and that was word for word what he said. And that's the most pushback I've had from someone, from my own father, not from so much from the industry, but it actually was a huge encouragement for me to keep doing what I want to do, what felt right for me. And the industry has welcomed me and has been nothing but supportive. And so, Sophie, you touched base on an experience you had, and it reminded me of something that I've had when I work in the vineyard. Tim and I work together, and we prune vineyards, or, you know, do whatever we're doing. And I remember one client in particular only spoke to Tim. Meanwhile, I was doing the same thing there all day, could not look me in the eye and speak to me. And, you know, I mean, that's a reflection of maybe something that's going on with them personally. You know, I can't do anything about that, but it was a very interesting experience. And me and Tim would just laugh about it. But it just, you know, goes to show that, yeah, there's definitely some ideas and some issues that people might have with a woman being in the vineyard or the winery. But I just say, stick to your guns, keep doing what you're doing. If it makes you feel good, if you feel empowered by what you're doing, just roll with it. And there's always people around to support you, men and women.
Mm.
I agree. And being one half of the team and the female one, it's very similar, and same with Soph. Soph and I are pretty lucky that where we are, there's a lot of lady winemakers, and everyone, there's not. I mean, I don't feel there's any disadvantage to us being women making wine where we are, but I do know that when we go to wine shows or events or anything, there's a lot of so you help Mark make his wine, and I'm like, well, it's both of us, so
Yeah, it's real. You help, aren't you?
yeah.
Lovely to help.
Yeah. I just do the admin apparently, but whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's still a lot of but once you kind of tell people, they're a bit more like, oh, okay. I think it's an assumption that needs to be addressed. That's what it is.
We used to be known as the female co-op down at Cullen's, because we had all women and one men, and then we went all men, and it's like it sort of changes, but I think it's really nice to have an equality of men and women in all parts of the workplace, having the vineyard, the winery, the front of house. So it's just nice, because both have their disadvantages. If you have all men and then you just one woman, it becomes very heavy. It's just nice for everyone to have equal numbers, I think, as much as you can. So, and address that gender balance. And if there are issues, which there can come if you have issues, if you have people from another generation, they're older, to address that and to acknowledge it and to bring it up, because it can just become a part of a culture. And really, when we're talking about we're working with the Mother Earth, it really has to be about the earth, not about humans, as much as we can, and to have a less human-centric viewpoint with everything, really. So it's funny having been through all of that and seeing, Mum was a real trailblazer. She used to work out there with all men, and the wives of they used to just laugh all the time, the women. They were just so funny. And our characters, and I think that whole globalization and what you have to be, and all the forms you have to fill in, and the everything that you have to do now to do anything, to be bureaucracy, and to you walk in anywhere, you have to pull out your phone, all those sorts of things. It's becoming sort of overwhelming and less connecting in terms of being human beings, really, whether you're men or women. But I think going back to the focus of the earth is really important, and nature. So that's the luxury. But yeah, I think it is. I've got so many stories about that sort of thing, that you sort of just put it to the side, park it, and at some level, and you just keep going, because those things that I think everyone has their sense of weakness about things, both men and women, and try and make the best human situation you can out of your world in an earth way.
Yeah. So something that is really important to me to cover in this panel is something that I feel like is sometimes left out in the natural wine conversations, which is the actual regions in the wine. We spend a lot of time talking about all of these really, really important issues, but I also want to give you all a chance to really talk about what you're doing in your vineyards in the winery. I have props here with me if you need them, but you don't have to talk about these particular wines, but I do have wines from each of you. Start with Alicia. So yeah, this is what vintage is this? This is your 2018 Sauvignon from Fleurieu Peninsula. You don't have to talk about this. You can talk about other things, but I found it to be a pretty unique and compelling wine. So yeah, just love to hear a bit about the regions you work with, Adelaide Hills, but also Southern Fleurieu and Fleurieu Peninsula, which I think is a less represented region in Australia, and kind of just the grapes you're working with, and I guess kind of general philosophy.
So the Sauvignon, which I think is the best white wine grapes, my favorite, that is in the southern Fleurier in a place called Mount Compass. And the vineyard there is, it's grown to organic standards, but it's not certified. The owner also has, well, actually majority of that property is put aside for bushland. So it's like natural corridors and stuff in between the grazing and the vineyards and the rest of the area. It's grown on sand, which I quite like, being a coastal area. I don't know. It's just really nice down there. I like going down there. It is an hour away, but it's nice. Also, the other grapes we get from there, there's Chardonnay, there's Merlot, Pinot Gris, Pinot Noir, and a bit of Cab Sav. And that's where majority of our grapes come from. And we've been buying grapes from there since 2017, and we are always in conversation with the owner about how it's run, and it's nice. I mean, I like it. I don't know what else to say. Sorry, I'm a bit tired.
No, all good. I like it too. I think it's delicious. I think it's really Sauvignon is a grape we, of course, associate with Jura, and I think that I think your version is like true to that style, but has like there's like an Australian saltiness to it, a little bit of plumpness that's really appealing and really, I think, speaks to this region. Awesome. Really excited to have that. Vanya, I have in front of me from you the 2018 Dancing the Sun, but again, you don't have to talk about that. Cabernet and Chardonnay are such focuses for your winery, and I'd love to hear a little bit about just that program and how you kind of approach your winemaking.
Yeah, well, I think the comment about where is Australia heading as a country. When I feel like I feel really old saying when I started out. But anyway, Australian wine brand, was all sort of cross-regional blends with house styles of added tannin, added acid, and to a certain level it still is. But then, there was, the region started, and now we're in the Margaret River region, but we are in the Willie Abrupt sub-region. Unfortunately, the growers lost a fight to get a GI for that because the bigger producers in Margaret River objected, all this statistics was pulled out. But Dr. John Gladstone's, who's the person who wrote the paper for the reason why Margaret River was planted, identified different sub-regions, and all winemakers, we had a tasting in 1999, and all winemakers, acknowledged at that time there's a great difference. Margaret River is 118 kilometres long by 27 kilometres wide. We're sitting right on the Indian Ocean. There's nothing in between us and Reunion Island. So ancient country. And there's a lot of difference as you travel that from north to south. Now we can only talk about north, middle and south. However, we're in the Willie Abrupt sub-region. Willie Abrupt is an Indigenous word meaning a place of many coloured ochres. And Zach Webb, the traditional custodian, says if you astral travel and go above, you can see that this whole region is shaped like a woman's breast. So it's woman's country. And you have the Willie Abrupt, you can see the Willie Abrupt Creek has many coloured ochres. And I like to think that the red ochre is the Cabernet Sauvignon soil with the ironstone and the 500-million-year-old granite rocks that are there. So we started off as a minimal chemicals, then organic and biodynamic. And I think the way we make our wine is we grow the wines in the vineyard. We don't make any additions at all to anything, and we harvest around the planetary calendar. We only use animal, mineral, and plant. Well, the plant plants from the yarrow, the dandelion, chamomile, oak bark, valerian. We make our own compost from our own cows. We consider our wines to be vegan, but it really is that artisanal wine where no wine is made, and same seems like with you guys, you're the same. No wines are made with a recipe. They're sort of we I taste the grapes every day during harvest and make a decision about harvest, and when they come in, we have an idea of where they're going in terms of what style of wine, but that can always change. So we'll have a tank, a barrel, a press ready to go to have a look at them, another look as they come in. And they are, the interesting thing this year with, we had quite a wet season, and our fruit was very little disease because the land's so healthy and the vines are healthy through that, intelligence in the soil of the biodynamics, the microflora, are driving that health in the soil and the vine and the grapes, which creates this very unique, healthy vineyard. So we're able to really travel at a place of great purity with our wines and non-additions. So we change how we make the wine substantially, going biodynamic, and that is really just everything happens as it comes into the winery. We hand harvest around the calendar. We love fruit and flower days according to Maria Thun calendar. We love moon opposite Saturn and full moons and full moon perigees. Because we believe all these times give a different activation and energy and beautiful connection to place and to the sky, to nature, really. So it is very much artisanal, and it's a lot of work. But you have that, the winery is connected, is almost, and I would say, I think the comment about going biodynamic is that, the vineyard is alive in the winery and the wines are grown there. So it's just a very sort of, and the voice of the land comes straight through because there's nothing in between the grapes and the wine. And that, as a principle, we have people come to work at our place and they say, if they come to our place first, they go to other places and they say, wow, we wish we came to your place after because we didn't know what you didn't do. Because they thought we just brought the wines in crate, all of that. So until you see what other winemakers are doing, adding, and, when you've got when you're bigger, you do have to, at some level, work at a recipe level. But that consistency and that, I did a back vintage tasting of Diana Madeline last night in Perth, and the differences in the vintages it's very beautiful, and that comes from the vintage because we don't make any additions rather than having a house style. So that's the fun of it. And I think, the way that people are traveling now, it is fun, and it is about the land and that connection. So that's how we make wine. It's a lot of work. It's very attention to detail, keeping the winery clean and making sure that the wine goes into bottle as the best quality that it can. And I believe that our wines we're making now from the haven't been biodynamic from 2004 are the best we've ever made. And the Dancing in the Sun is a fun wine. It's just a blend of Verdelho, Sauvignon Blanc, Semillon, no oak, and it's just we made a Dancing in the Moonlight. Actually, it was a friend of ours went to a tasting and the producer, who's a neighbour, said that their winemaker was as natural as anything, and she didn't have to be biodynamic and dance naked in the moonlight like Vanya Cullen. So I was going to contact the owner, and I thought, well, that's a bit insulting. Then I thought, they couldn't care less. So I thought, well, you might as well own it. So we released a rosé called Dancing in the Moonlight, and then Dancing in the Sun came after that. So it's all been a bit of fun, really. how do you beat them when they're everybody who's trying to do beating you down? So Dancing in the Moonlight rosé has been one of our biggest hits. It's taken off. Obviously everyone wants to dance in the moonlight.
Yeah. And I love that you bring up the specific region you're in, really abrupt. I think that's one thing that my husband and I have been really outspoken about with Australia, is really pushing regionality and really, getting to know these regions more and more in depth, and that as being sort of the ticket really to kind of greater understanding, greater specificity of the land, and ultimately, this is a business. I think greater sales, like greater price points, like people have to be able to recognize a regional specificity, in order to spend money on something. When you think about how we look at Burgundy or how we look at Champagne or Bordeaux or all of these regions, I think regional specificity is a huge part.
Yeah, the maturity of a wine region or maturity of a country. If you can't say this is where we make the wine from and this is what it is, then people go, oh, well, you know what, Australia's huge. Where's that? You know, so thanks, Jane. That's really good to hear, because it's the direction where Australia needs to take, you know, in terms of we're an ancient country making great wine, but where is it from? And to acknowledge and honour that place and to protect it too, you know, like we're named Willie Abrupt needs to be protected. And it's not saying that other people don't make as good a wine. It's just saying this is what we get from our place, and to protect that. So, yeah, it was very heartbreaking last year to have that decision come through. But still, we're allowed to still call it Willie Abrupt Margaret River, and we do. So, and we're talking about it.
Cool. All right. So next. I have your 2019 Gloria, but again, kind of tell us about, in general, what types of wines you make, what's possible with your land, what you guys are doing.
Cool. Well, we've got that's Gloria Pinot Noir, and we've got Chardonnay. So in the 90s, my mum had the idea to plant this property and to plant out the vines. So first was the Chardonnay and then was the Pinot Noir. So they're kind of between the age of, well, in 2024, we would have been here for 30 years and the grapes would be about 25, 28 years old. So all from my mama that had the vision to do it. She never wanted to be a maker. She just wanted to grow grapes. And it took us a little while to come back. When my brother and I came back about 8 years ago, we were coming back to cherries, like I said before, cherries and apples and a few strawberries, and a very kind of quiet, like I went to Basket Range Primary School, there was 50 kids. Not a single child that went to school we still lived in Basket Range or the surrounding areas. So it's a place that loses youth quite quickly. So when we came back, we were like, we're going to come back and we're going to turn this property around, because Mum was like, okay, cool, because my dad is an art conservator. He's actually had never had anything to do with the farming on this property. And so she was like, hey, I'm a bit sick of it. I'm 60-something years old and I'm farming 20 acres under vine by myself. Did you want to help me out? So we came back and helped her out, and things changed in those couple of years. We were just selling the grapes. My mum was selling her Chardonnay and Pinot, farming conventionally for $500 a ton is what the big guys would just wait until you were so desperate that you would sell them for anything, basically. $500 a ton, for those who don't know, is our grapes are now between $2,500 and $3,000 a ton in the realm of organic viticulturally world, and they can go up. It can go up from that. But that's where my mum was at. So we kind of, the ball started to roll. We met Anton from Lucy Margot. He was buying our fruit because we converted the vineyards to organic back 6 or 7 years ago. And so began the process. I think for me, what is really special about now is the difference of, or the kind of the ease of movement into something like in natural wine, in Basket Range, if we didn't have each other. So there's Anton, may he rest in peace, Taras Akoda and Amber Akoda, the Gentlefolk Wines, BK, Comsi, Comsa, Commune of Buttons, and I'm sure I'm forgetting people. But what it meant to me is that when we moved back, we were like, oh my God, there is young people living here. People are understanding Basket Range. And it's our conversations that we get to have with each other that give us confidence to make decisions in the vineyards and in the wineries that change the wine. So I think that it's almost, we've got on the back of our bottles an expression from the sun, the soil, and the community. For us, in Basket Range, we're really lucky to have a shoulder to cry on, or someone to listen or have a drink with or try these wines. I have no idea what's going on. A conversation that means, winemaking can be a very lonely space because of how kind of complicated. You only really understand it when you are a winemaker, and grower, how complicated in the realm of how many decisions you make on a daily basis and how many different variants there are as to what your wine can end up being. So to have each other, Yalma and Manon were the other two that I managed to forget.
The Brodricks as well.
Oh, Brodrick, the basket range
itself.
Yeah. So we all really quite support each other. And I think that also has meant that it means that we push boundaries a little bit more. It means we've got a little bit more confidence. Unconventional. And it's meant that the movement as such for natural wine in Australia, for South Australians especially, has been stronger because we support each other. I mean, we have niggles with each other. We have everyone has a little flare up at someone at whatever. That's community though, right? So that's, to me, a really, really important part of why our wines are the way they are from this region. Because there's not a lot of vineyards in Basket Range. In fact, there's, I think, 3 vineyards in Basket Range, and they are 30 acres and under. It's called Basket Range because it's the most intense kind of area in the Mount Lofty Ranges that is really up and down. So there's no flat space range at all, and the hills are really steep and are covered in forest. So we're very much bush meets vines type thing. So they are, to me, and of course the Mount Lofty Ranges is one of the oldest mountain ranges on the planet. It used to be 3 or 4 times the size that it is now. So we're on clay, red clay, quartz, iron shale, and sandstone, sedimentary sandstone. There's a sandstone quarry on our property. So these mountains are all, that's why they're so small. There's only 700 meters above sea level, but we were bigger before, but now we're kind of at the end, the core of the mountain, as it were. And John Carty, who is the Director of Humanities at the South Australian Museum, said, why do people do biodynamics? Why do people listen to a German guy? This is not me saying don't do biodynamics. He said, why do people listen to some farming techniques from someone who's farming a piece of land post-war in Germany when they could be listening to the First Nations people about how to farm these old countries and this old land? And I thought, to me, that just sent me in a spiral of, that's such a good point. How do we begin to open those conversations about farming, about burning, about all of these the land management practices? Because there's really not a lot of paramount people. There may be some bloodlines, but it's, anytime I've done any research into it, I haven't had any luck with tracking people down.
Actually, Alex Podolinsky is Australian, and he developed most of the procedures for biodynamics. So they are European plants, but he worked a lot of that in Australia. So it's more about how people used to farm before chemicals rather than Rudolf Steiner. And I agree, the Indigenous people, why would they want to? We murder them, or why would they want to tell us what they did? We're not really listening yet. So it's
that's
you've
not
got to do something.
Yeah,
not using chemicals is a big thing.
And I premise that with saying, I'm not saying don't do biodynamics. It's just that he's a historian. He speaks 5 different languages, Aboriginal languages, the person I was talking to. So he is the head of humanities at the art gallery. So he's asking me that question as somebody who uses biodynamic preps and that farms to be biodynamically certified at some point. He's asking me that question because it's a very valid question. Of course it is. Of course that's a valid question. You can't. I don't think, yeah. You can
We've been
see-
trying to get Indigenous seeds, and we can't even get Indigenous seeds to put on our land, except if they're from South Australia. So you guys are further ahead than we are. So it's like it's a really good conversation, but the knowledge just isn't there in terms of it requires. We're actually working on the 6-season calendar to have our own calendar of the 6th season, because the 6-season calendar, according to the Indigenous folk, that's their knowledge. They own it. It's not something for us to make money from. So, everybody has to do the work themselves in terms of, the 6 seasons are far more applicable to Australian, well, certainly West Australian seasons rather than, the 4 seasons from Europe. But it's easy to be negative, but, what are people doing to change that? And I think that the Indigenous cultures are they're not even recognised in our constitution yet. So in terms of getting them to give us all their knowledge, well, I think any time an Indigenous person actually speaks to you, I think they're being very generous, given what's happened to them. So that's a great topic, and I think it would be. But given there's, no research from the Australian Wine Research Institute about organic or biodynamic that I remember, it's very difficult in the Australian wine industry to get those topics happening. So it's going to have to come from a grassroots level of the producers. So, those conversations are wonderful to have. And then what can you do about it? We've been trying, but it's very difficult to get anywhere. We actually had a workshop with the local Wadandi people, the Underlup Association, where they did a cultural training for all our staff about country, and that was a wonderful morning's workshop, learning about their culture and the stolen generation, but it's certainly not funded by anyone, and we had to pay for that ourselves, which we're happy to, but just getting an understanding of their culture, and to actually, you have to make the effort. And the other thing that people say to me is, oh, well, I rang them up and they didn't call me back, and I want to know about their seed so I can put it in my business. And it's like, well, it's this assumption that they owe that to us, and in actual fact it's a privilege that they even would want to set up business and do, sell anything to us and to teach about their culture. So it's not an assumption that they owe it to us, because every time I speak to someone they think, oh, well, they should be telling us. But it's something that is a huge, and certainly with our 50 years turning 50, we've got 65,000 years of Wadandi culture underneath our soils, which I believe that, Zach always spoke about, having soft earth from earth to sky, and it really feels like that. You can walk barefoot in our vineyard, and it's soft and easy, where it used to be very hard and rocky. And the to learn about those things slowly, and to understand what those things were, that they looked after the country for 65,000 years, and had great land care, is what were the things that they were doing, and certainly fire is one of them. But there's many things, and it's a cultural difference of how we look at land as being something we can get something from, as opposed to something that we give something back to and have a balanced, caring relationship with. So yeah, I mean, happy to hear any dialogue that anyone has about Indigenous culture for learning, but there's not that, there's very difficult to find that information because of all the reasons we know.
Yeah, I think John Carty's actually someone we've spoken with as well, and he's, I think, an incredible kind of bridge between Indigenous communities and I guess non-Indigenous communities, you'd say. In the interest of time, I'm going to move on to Niki. I have your Farmer's Fizz in front of me. I know you talked a little bit about it before we had kind of officially started, but if you want to just talk a little bit about what you guys are doing, and also tell us about the Bellarine, because I don't think anyone is probably even familiar with Geelong.
Yeah, so we are a tiny region. Can you guys hear me all right?
Yeah.
Yep. So the Bellarine Peninsula is a subregion of GI Geelong, which is quite a large region. It goes all the way up to the Morrible Valley, northwest of Melbourne. It's so the Bellarine overlooks Port Phillip Bay. It's a kind of, I would put it between maritime and temperate climate varies. The soils are usually dark clay, sandy loam, ironstone. There's a combination, all of that running through. The predominant varieties grown here are Pinot Noir and Chardonnay, and also Shiraz. Some areas have planted Zinfandel, which is ripening, and it's obviously not as powerful as the Californian Zinfandel, but it's actually quite tasty. But in recent times, people actually have been planting Gamay, Sangiovese, Fiano. So these are some of the larger producers in the area. They're really experimenting with varieties that are a bit more climatic to the region as this region warms up a bit more. I think in the past and even now, they do consider our Bellarine Peninsula as a cooler climate region, but considering the fact that we're going to be planting vines in Timboon, much colder than Bellarine, and I'm originally from Canada, and you know, it's really where we do also grow grapes there, and that's truly a cool climate. So it's great to see that just what's happening in this particular area. There's just plantings of new varieties that people haven't quite worked with over the last 25 years. But in relation to the Farmer's Fizz, that comes from a vineyard very close to Port Phillip Bay. It's grown on sandy loam and ironstone. It's on a hill, single vineyard. It has been farmed organically for the last 3 years up until I think this year, from my knowledge. I might be wrong. Uncertified. It's picked quite early. Natural ferment. Rest on lees for about 7 months. Disgorged, and nothing is added. So what you have there, Jane, is Chardonnay Pinot Noir, and there's so many points that you guys are talking about. I wish I made notes because I'm forgetting all the things I wanted to say to you guys about the region and what's going on here. So Sophie, you mentioned that you have a huge support system of different producers around you. In our area, we're tiny, and we're one of the first kind of groups making wines that are unconventional or more natural, if you want to, you know, put a label on them. There's a few other smaller producers like Ben Mullen, Tash Webster, and some old school winemakers that are making their own wines in their own way, such as you guys might be familiar with Robin Brockett, that's doing a lot of you know, wild yeast ferments aged in amphora. He makes beautiful wines, you know, under his own label. Darren Burke, another small wine producer, and all of these people work for some of the big guys. So there's a small sense of support. People having their own creative labels, and yeah, I think that's a huge movement into doing a few things a little bit different and supporting kind of the education and the transition into more organics. But again, it's a lot of the property owned here is old generation families, and who have varying values and you know, varying kind of goals and what they want from the properties here. So we feel really lucky that we have a small support system, and but we're also really excited to kind of go beyond this region and plant elsewhere in areas that are undiscovered. I do love the idea of having an area recognized under a GI, but at the same time, I'm a bit more excited in kind of exploring areas that have no recognition and minimal planting, and then see what they give us. So that's moving towards Timboon.
Right, thank you. I think the platform's going to kick us off soon. I know it's getting late for most people here in the US too. If anyone had a question, shoot it in the chat now, while I'm going to kind of do the closing business. Just wanted to say thank you again to Molly's Bottle Shop in Seattle for making this panel possible. Hopefully everyone is able to tune in for more of Wine Fair tomorrow. This is the last panel of today. But tomorrow, starting off at 9 a.m. Pacific time with a panel called Kvevri This, the Women Taking Over Georgia's Natural Wine Movement. All right. I don't know if Pamela is planning to come back on, but I think I'll just go ahead and sign off with all of you. Thank you so much. This is really such a great pleasure for me. It's just really great to hear Australian accents. I miss it. And you all are fantastic, and I really appreciate so much what you're doing for Australian wine, for the world. It's really amazing to see. So everyone should get out there and buy some of their wines. They're all currently being imported to the US, if that is where you are tuning in from. And yeah, thank you so much.